The chandelier above the boardroom table glowed too bright, its gold-tinted light dripping across crystal glasses and polished silver. I'd been in rooms like this before, lavish, intimidating, heavy with money in the air, but tonight the weight pressed harder. Maybe because it wasn't my name etched onto the frosted glass doors of Celeste Dynamics. It was hers. My wife. The CEO. The servers floated in and out, refilling wine, sliding plates of steak and salmon across the long table. Laughter carried across the mahogany, sharp and layered, a performance in itself. The board members adored her. They tolerated me. I knew my role: smile, nod, raise a glass when appropriate. Be a supportive husband. The silent accessory. And then he walked in. The air changed the moment Ethan Mercer entered the room, all effortless confidence wrapped in a tailored suit. My wife's ex. Her first great love, the story she claimed ended years ago. But the way the room bent toward him, like he carried gravity itself, it was impossible to forget why people still whispered his name in industry corridors. Ethan wasn't just her ex. He was a rival CEO, charming the same investors, circling the same empire. He shook hands with the board members, trading jokes, smiling with a perfect set of teeth that somehow made his cruelty palatable. When his eyes landed on me, they lingered a second too long. Amusement flickered in them, as though I'd wandered into a game I wasn't supposed to play. Dinner unfolded, a blur of strategic talk disguised as casual chatter. Stock projections. Partnership proposals. A new acquisition rumor that set the room humming. I listened, filing details away, though no one expected me to contribute. And then Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of Bordeaux like a conductor readying his baton. His voice cut across the conversation. "So," he said, his gaze sweeping the table before fixing on me, "how's the life of a house husband treating you?" Silence snapped across the room like a whip. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. But no, the smirk on his face, the slight tilt of his head, the deliberate cruelty in the word house husband, he knew exactly what he was doing. Laughter erupted. Not from everyone. Not even from most. But enough. A few board members chuckled nervously, their glances darting between Ethan and me, gauging whether it was safe to join in. One of them, a man who once shook my hand like I mattered, laughed too loudly, the sound bouncing off the walls. My chest tightened. My fingers curled under the table, nails pressing into my palm. Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to fire back, to show him I wasn't just the appendage to my wife's success. But my throat burned with silence. I looked at my wife. She froze. Her wine glass paused halfway to her lips, eyes flickering to me, then to Ethan, then back to me. No defense. No sharp rebuttal. Nothing. Just a crack in her expression, as though she hadn't decided whose side she was on. And that broke me more than the insult. Because the room was still laughing. Because Ethan's smirk stretched wider, feeding off the awkwardness, the power. Because my wife didn't move, didn't speak. My mind replayed every whispered conversation we'd had in bed about him. About how he'd never understood her vision. About how she chose me because I believed in her. About how the past was just the past. Yet here, in this room of power, where every word was currency, she let his insult hang like gospel truth. My heart pounded, hot blood rushing to my ears. I wanted to slam my fist into the polished table, to wipe the smug look off his face, to remind everyone in that room that I wasn't invisible. But my body betrayed me. I sat still, heat trapped beneath my skin, my silence fueling his victory. And then he looked at her. Not at me. At her. That was the kill shot. His smirk softened into something almost intimate, as though the whole room didn't exist, as though he was addressing her alone. "See? This is the man you chose." I swear the seconds stretched into hours. My wife blinked, sipped her wine, and turned away. No denial. No defense. Nothing. And the worst part? He looked right at my wife when he said it, and she didn't deny it. I barely slept. The sheets twisted around me like restraints, my body burning with the echo of laughter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's smirk, heard the clink of crystal glasses, felt the silence from the one person who should have defended me. My wife lay beside me, breathing evenly, already drifting away as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't let it go. The word, house husband, rattled in my skull like a loose screw in a machine. He hadn't just said it, he branded me with it. And the boardroom laughed because, to them, maybe it was true. That night cracked open old memories I'd buried. Subtle things I had pretended not to notice. The way her assistants rarely asked me anything beyond, "Do you need a drink while you wait?" The way the board members shook my hand but never asked my opinion. This way, even at home, she sometimes said, "Don't worry about this deal, it's complicated," as if I hadn't spent years studying the very balance sheets she dismissed. It wasn't that I didn't have a mind for it. I did. Numbers calmed me. Ratios, forecasts, market patterns, they made sense when people didn't. I'd spent nights tinkering with her company's public data, cross-checking trends, finding inefficiencies no one else seemed to notice. Quiet victories in the privacy of my laptop, never spoken aloud. But in her empire, I was the accessory. A ring on her finger that could talk, but not too much. I sat up, shoved the laptop open. The glow painted my face as if the machine itself judged me. Spreadsheets blinked to life. My own private labyrinth of data I'd tracked for months. Her company's revenues. Her competitors, Ethan's moves. I wasn't idle. I wasn't useless. I'd been watching. And Ethan Mercer, he was always there, like a ghost refusing to leave the house. The stories I'd heard about him weren't just from her. They were industry folklore. The golden boy who closed deals with a smile and then gutted companies from the inside out. The man who walked away from her years ago but still lingered in every board member's mind as, the one who got away. She said he didn't matter anymore. But I saw the way her eyes flinched at his name. The way silence filled the room whenever he came up in conversation. Silence heavier than words. I rubbed my face, exhaustion clawing at me. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was overthinking. But I couldn't shake the image of him, leaning back with that smug smirk, branding me like I was nothing. No. I wouldn't let that be the truth. The hours blurred as I pored through financial records, cross-referencing news reports, tracking shell companies. It was an obsession, but the numbers told a story if you knew how to listen. Patterns formed. His movements weren't random, they were predatory. And then, at 3:12 a.m., a new email slid into my inbox. No sender. No subject line. Just a file attachment. My heart stuttered. I hovered over it, half expecting malware. But curiosity crushed caution. I opened it. A PDF bloomed on the screen, stamped with confidential headers. Pages of strategy, projections, acquisition structures, Ethan's company targeting hers like a hawk circling prey. A hostile takeover. Not just rumors. Proof. I leaned back in my chair, pulse thundering in my ears. This wasn't about me being a house husband. This was war. And the bastard was already moving his pieces. The ballroom glittered like a diamond mine, chandeliers dripping light across a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns. The air was thick with money, champagne flutes raised, conversations looping in circles of power and ambition. A networking gala, they called it. To me, it felt like a battlefield disguised in silk and candlelight. I adjusted my tie, playing the role I'd perfected, the quiet husband standing 2 steps behind the star. My wife, radiant in a black satin dress, had already been swept into a circle of investors. She thrived here, her laugh sharp and polished, her confidence magnetic. I watched her, wondering if she knew how much of that circle Ethan had already poisoned. Because he was here too. Of course he was. I spotted him across the room, surrounded by a cluster of board members. He didn't just enter a room, he tilted it. People leaned toward him, drinks half forgotten in their hands, as though gravity itself bent in his favor. He looked effortless in his suit, the kind of man magazines wanted on their covers. And damn him, he knew it. I felt the weight of the leaked file sitting in my phone, hidden but burning. Every smile he gave, every handshake, I saw through it now. This wasn't charm, it was conquest. I forced myself to move, to blend into the flow of the evening. But as I circled closer, I noticed the signs. The way 2 of my wife's board members laughed a little too loudly at his joke. The way another leaned in, nodding eagerly while Ethan spoke, as if Ethan, not my wife, was the gravity pulling their loyalty. It was happening in front of me. His influence, already seeping. I turned away, needing space, but he was faster. Ethan broke from the group and slid into my path like a predator who'd scented blood. "Well, if it isn't the house husband himself," he said smoothly, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. His smile was pleasant enough to fool anyone else nearby. I clenched my jaw. "Enjoying yourself?" "Oh, more than you know." He sipped his drink, eyes flicking past me to where my wife stood with her circle. "You know, it's funny. Some men marry into power. Others," he let the words hang, savoring them. Others build it with their own hands. Real men build empires. The words hit like a blade slipped between my ribs. My pulse jumped, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching. Funny, I said evenly, I always thought real men didn't need to remind everyone of it. His smirk curved wider. Sharp. You've got a tongue after all. Shame you don't have a throne to sit on. He leaned in closer, breath warm against my ear. She'll always choose a king over his servant. Don't forget that. I wanted to break his perfect nose. Instead, I stood rooted, fury churning just beneath my skin. The rest of the night blurred. I wandered the ballroom, watching the small betrayals unfold, board members drifting toward him like moths to flame, subtle touches on his arm, whispers shared with too much familiarity. Every smile felt like a crack forming in the foundation beneath my wife's empire. But it wasn't until the end of the evening that the true dagger slipped between my ribs. I was near the exit when Ethan passed me again, casual as ever, phone in hand. He chuckled, tapping a message on the screen before glancing up at me. Tell your wife, he said lightly, that moving the quarterly strategy session to Friday won't save her. I've already accounted for it. I froze. My throat went dry. That meeting, rescheduled just this morning, was an internal decision. Private. Only discussed inside the company walls. Which meant one thing. He had a mole inside her company. The charity gala pulsed with music and conversation, a swirl of glittering dresses and tuxedos under the soft glow of chandeliers. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne, their steps rehearsed as if the entire night had been choreographed. And in the center of it all, like always, stood my wife. She thrived in these rooms, commanding attention with the same ease she commanded a boardroom. Her laughter carried, light but sharp, wrapping around investors and politicians like velvet rope. I'd grown used to watching her shine while I remained in the background, but tonight the glow cut sharper. Because standing beside her was Ethan. The two of them looked like they'd never left each other's orbit. His hand rested a second too long on the small of her back as he leaned in to whisper something. She laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard in years, genuine and unguarded, not the polished one she wore for cameras. It stung like acid. I watched from across the room, my glass of bourbon sweating in my hand. To everyone else, I was the silent husband, the accessory. But inside, I was unraveling, every second stretching taut. They moved together like they remembered how, as though their history wasn't history at all but something breathing right there in front of me. He tilted his head, she leaned closer. Their smiles mirrored each other. The shared past between them was a ghost I could never banish. I knew my role. I was supposed to drift closer, place my hand on her arm, smile like everything was fine. Reinforce the image, the perfect CEO couple. But I didn't. For the first time, I refused. I stayed where I was, my face set in stone, my glass untouched. When her eyes flicked across the room, searching for me, I didn't move. I let the silence between us stretch. I didn't smile. I didn't play the dutiful husband. I blocked her. It was a small act, almost invisible, but in a world where image was everything, it was rebellion. I would not be her stage prop tonight. Not while Ethan's hand brushed against her like he still had the right. The rest of the evening blurred. Conversations washed over me like static. People approached, said polite things I barely registered. My focus never strayed far from her and Ethan. Every glance they shared twisted deeper, but I refused to step in. If she wanted to bask in his gravity, let her. I would not orbit. Hours later, the music softened, signaling the gala's end. Guests trickled out into the night air, coats draped over arms, murmurs fading into the city. I slipped toward the exit, craving distance, craving silence. But she was faster. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she caught up to me in the dim hallway outside the ballroom. Her hand closed around my arm, nails biting into my sleeve. Her voice was low, controlled, but beneath it, a tremor of anger. "Why," she said, her eyes burning into mine, "did you block me in front of everyone?" The boardroom smelled faintly of leather and espresso. Long glass walls let the morning light pour in, cold and merciless, as though the sun itself wanted to witness the spectacle. I sat at the far end of the polished table, a seat I hadn't chosen but had been guided to, quietly, out of the way. My wife sat at the head, shoulders squared, every inch the CEO she'd fought to become. The board members flanked her, a dozen polished sharks, pens poised, eyes bright with expectation. And across from me, like he belonged there, sat Ethan Mercer. He wore the room like a custom suit. His tie was loosened just enough to look effortless, his smile a weapon honed sharper than any blade. Ladies and gentlemen, he began smoothly, gesturing toward a slide deck projected onto the screen, what you're facing is not a weakness, it's an opportunity. If we restructure your product launch schedule and reallocate investment here, he tapped the numbers with practiced ease, you'll not only meet your targets, you'll crush them. Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. Heads nodded. One of the older board members actually scribbled something down like a student at his lecture. I gritted my teeth. I knew what this was. He wasn't here to help. He was positioning himself as the savior, making my wife's empire look shaky so he could swoop in with answers. I glanced at her. She was listening. Too closely. Ethan leaned back, confident, letting the silence do his work. Then he added, almost casually, of course, if we'd had these strategies in place 2 quarters ago, we'd be having a very different conversation. A subtle dagger. Past tense. If only someone else had been running things. The board chuckled, low and knowing. My wife stiffened, but she didn't counter him. I couldn't take it. You're manipulating them, I said, voice sharper than I intended. Heads turned. Eyes blinked at me as though I'd spoken out of turn in a classroom. Ethan's smile didn't falter. I'm clarifying, he said smoothly. When billions are on the line, clarity matters. Don't you agree? I agree clarity matters, I snapped, but so does integrity. And you. Enough. My wife's voice cut across mine, firm, cold. My throat tightened. She didn't look at me, not directly. She looked at the board. Ethan is here in a professional capacity. Let's treat him that way. Professional. The word lodged like a shard of glass. She had chosen to defend him, not me. In front of them all. A board member cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. The rest scribbled notes, their attention already drifting back to Ethan. My protest had evaporated, meaningless. I sat back, silenced, my pulse roaring in my ears. Every laugh, every nod in Ethan's direction felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of my relevance. He didn't even need to gloat, his victory was in the room itself, in the way it bent toward him, in the way she hadn't bent toward me. The meeting dragged on, every minute another slow twist of the knife. By the end, Ethan was the gravity of the table, pulling everyone into his orbit. And I was nothing more than a shadow at the edge. When it was finally over, I stepped into the hallway, air sharp in my lungs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, thumb hovering. A new message flashed across the screen, encrypted, no sender ID. I opened it. I know how to destroy him. Do you want the file? The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. I sat in the dark, phone in my hand, staring at the encrypted message like it might detonate. I know how to destroy him. Do you want the file? No name. No number. Just a promise. The glow of the screen lit my face as I turned the message over in my mind, again and again. Who sent it? David, the loyal CFO who'd always treated me with more respect than most. Or someone else in the shadows, an enemy of Ethan's who wanted to use me as a pawn. The thought clawed at me, but before I could sink deeper into it, my phone lit up again. A call. Her name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But my thumb betrayed me. Hello. Her voice came through, low, careful. We need to talk. Those words had always carried a certain weight in our marriage. Sometimes they meant fights. Sometimes confessions. Tonight, they sounded like an order. I swallowed. About what? About tonight. About the board. About us. Her sigh crackled through the line, sharp and exhausted. I need you to understand the position I'm in. I understand it just fine, I said quietly. You defended him over me. That's the position. Her silence stretched. When she finally spoke, her tone was soft, almost pleading. You think it was about choosing him. It wasn't. It was about holding the board together. They respect him. They listen to him. And right now, I need stability. Stability. The word hit like cold water. So what am I, then? My voice was steady, but the weight behind it nearly cracked me. Decoration. Distraction. A shield. Her breath caught. She didn't deny it. You make me look balanced. Humans. Like I'm not just a machine chasing numbers. When you're beside me, it reminds them I have a life outside the office. That matters. It wasn't love. It wasn't a partnership. It was useful. My chest tightened, blood rushing hot to my ears. So that's all I am to you. A reminder you're human. You're twisting it. Her voice hardened now, slipping into the tone she used in boardrooms. I need you to be strong for me. Don't question me. Not fight me when the stakes are this high. I need you to be supportive. Supportive. Another word sharpened into a blade. She didn't want me as a partner. She wanted me as a shield. An accessory she could wield when convenient. I stared out the window at the city lights, every tower glowing like a chess piece on a vast board. I'd been a pawn for too long. But before I could speak, before I could cut through her justifications with all the anger building in my chest, something shifted on the line. A muffled sound. A voice. Not hers. Not mine. Deep. Smooth. Too familiar. Ethan Mercer. Tell her I'll be ready at 10. My stomach dropped. The line was quiet again, her voice rushing in, quick, as if to cover. I'll call you tomorrow. Don't overthink this. Please. Just be there for me. But I didn't hear her anymore. All I heard was his voice echoing in my skull. She was with him. The first thing I saw when I opened my phone that morning wasn't the time. It wasn't my calendar. It was them. A photo. My wife and Ethan, side by side at a glossy hotel lobby bar, laughing over coffee cups. The caption on the post read, "Early morning grind. Power moves with power people." It wasn't from her account. No, it was an investor's, someone desperate to show the world they were in the orbit of giants. The kind of post that spreads fast, fed by hashtags and whispers. My thumb froze against the glass. I scrolled. More photos. A dinner shot at a rooftop restaurant, my wife leaning in toward him as he gestured mid-story. Another, them stepping out of the same black car, flashes of cameras catching their smiles. Every comment felt like a blade. Looks like the dream team's back together. Some bonds never break. The king and queen of the industry, unmatched. No mention of me. Not a trace. To the world, I didn't exist. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My chest ached, not with the raw sting of jealousy, but with something heavier. Confirmation. What had haunted me in silence was now broadcast to anyone with an internet connection. The worst part? She hadn't posted a single denial. No clarification. No reminder that she was married, that I was anything more than a ghost. I set the phone down, pressing my palms hard into my eyes. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public, viral. My life was reduced to a comments section where strangers speculated about my wife and her ex. And that was the moment I decided. No more. No more waiting for her to choose me. No more orbiting her like some satellite she barely acknowledged. No more letting Ethan's shadow swallow every part of me. If she needed me as an emotional shield, she could find someone else. I would not be her buffer, her stage prop, her background character. I was done depending on her. I opened my laptop, staring at the encrypted message still sitting in my inbox from days ago. I know how to destroy him. Do you want the file? The temptation gnawed at me, but I didn't touch it yet. Because just then, another notification flashed on my screen. This time, from someone I knew. David. David Ng, the company's CFO, the one man who'd always looked me in the eye instead of through me. A message from him, simple but loaded, dropped into my inbox. You need to see this. Don't ask how I got it. An attachment blinked beneath the text. I hesitated, pulse thudding, then clicked. Spreadsheets. Dozens of them. Not my wife's. Not ours. Ethan's. And buried inside them, numbers that didn't add up. A trail of debt hidden under layers of shell companies. Liabilities disguised as assets. An empire built on borrowed sand. My heart slammed in my chest. Ethan Mercer, the untouchable king, wasn't invincible. And now I have proof. The first step wasn't dramatic. It wasn't packing a suitcase or storming out of the penthouse. It wasn't a shouting match or a slammed door. It was silent. One by one, I deleted our old messages. Every late night, I need you. Every clipped, be ready at 7. Every string of instructions is disguised as affection. Watching the threads vanish was like peeling away a second skin I'd been suffocating in. I stood in the middle of our apartment, staring at the city through the wall of glass, and realized how much of me had been constructed around her. My time. My energy. My sense of worth. Every conversation was about her empire, her battles, her legacy. Not anymore. I moved deliberately, like a man rolling a boulder uphill in secret. I shifted my files to an encrypted drive only I controlled. I set up a rented desk in a co-working space downtown, away from her world of polished lobbies and executive glass towers. I spent hours there, hunched over spreadsheets David had risked his career to pass me, mapping out Ethan's rot. Debt, shell companies. A ballooning credit line no sane banker should have approved. Ethan wasn't a king, he was a gambler doubling down, desperate to bluff the table. And I knew enough about numbers to see exactly how to snap his foundation. I didn't text my wife to explain where I was. I didn't answer her half-hearted calls that pinged around midnight. I gave her the same silence she'd given me. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel like humiliation. It felt like control. Still, there was a weight pressing on me, the inevitability of confrontation. Ethan wasn't blind. He'd sensed the shift, the sudden absence of compliance. Predators always know when prey stops running. It was past midnight when I finally left the co-working space, my bag heavy with files, my mind wired with plans. The parking garage was mostly empty, rows of concrete echoing with my footsteps. The fluorescents above buzzed faintly, one flickering in a nervous stutter. I reached my car, keys in hand, when a shadow moved behind the next column. Late night for a house husband, a voice drawled. I froze. Ethan stepped out of the dark like he owned it, his suit jacket loose, tie undone, but the arrogance intact. His smile wasn't for me, it was for the game he thought he'd already won. I slid my keys into my pocket, spine stiff. Following me now? He chuckled, low and smooth. Don't flatter yourself. I don't follow. I anticipate. He leaned close enough that I could smell the sharp tang of whiskey on his breath. His words dropped into the cold air, each syllable sharpened to a blade. Stay out of the boardroom, he whispered, so close it felt like he was speaking inside my ear, or I'll bury you in it. The garage fell silent again, but the echo of his threat stayed, sinking into my bones. I didn't tell anyone when I left. No dramatic announcement, no suitcase wheeled past the concierge in some theater of independence. I booked a one-way ticket, packed light, and vanished into another skyline, one where my name wasn't linked to hers. The new city was loud in its own way. Less polished than hers. No glass towers reaching for the clouds, no glimmering boardrooms with ceilings taller than most homes. Here, the streets smelled of ambition and exhaust, consultancy firms tucked between coffee shops and startups still sweating through their first funding rounds. I rented a desk in a corner office that overlooked an old railway yard. Rusted steel, cranes that hadn't moved in years. The view reminded me of something I hadn't felt in months, perspective. The work came easily. Numbers always did. Quiet contracts trickled in, advising on restructuring, untangling balance sheets bloated with vanity projects, cleaning up messes no one else wanted to touch. I didn't need a spotlight, didn't need applause. All I needed was the rhythm of control, problem, solution, clarity. For the first time in a long time, I remembered who I was outside of her orbit. Not her husband. Not Ethan's target. Just me. And it was enough. But the world I'd left behind had its way of clawing back into my hands. Every morning, as I skimmed through financial journals and market alerts, Ethan's face appeared somewhere. A photo shaking hands with foreign investors. A headline about a bold acquisition. A press clip of him laughing, sleeves rolled up, the picture of leadership. And threaded beneath those headlines, another narrative pulsed. Quiet at first, then louder. Contracts slipping through her company's fingers. Partnerships suddenly reconsidered. Investors whispering about strategic missteps. Board members grumbling about loyalty and long-term vision. Ethan wasn't just leaning on her empire. He was cutting at the load-bearing beams, smiling while he loosened the bolts. I should have felt relieved. Vindication. After all, hadn't I been the one humiliated, dismissed, treated like a prop? But what I felt instead was distance, like I was finally sitting on the other side of the chessboard, watching the pieces move without the blindfold. I could see Ethan overextending, stretching himself too thin. I could see her empire wobbling because she trusted him. And I could see exactly how I might position myself in the gap between them. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in their drama. I was standing above it, breathing. Until my phone buzzed. A direct message. Her name. My wife. The words were short, typed fast, desperate enough that I read them twice to believe they were real. I need you. He's destroying everything. The cursor blinked under her words, waiting for me to answer. And for the first time, she sounded afraid. Walking back into her world felt like walking into a mausoleum. The marble floors gleamed under my shoes, polished so bright they reflected a man I barely recognized, taller somehow, steadier. The same lobby guards nodded, the same assistants typed behind glossy desks, but the air had shifted. Maybe it was me who'd shifted. I'd left as a liability. I'd returned as a ghost. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. 12 men and women around the glass table, their suits expensive, their eyes calculating. At the head sat my wife, composed, unreadable. And at her side, leaning back with smug ease, was Ethan. He noticed me instantly. His smirk was small, but it hit the room like a flare. Well, he drawled, his voice carrying just enough for the board to hear, the house husband rises from the dead. A ripple of polite chuckles traveled around the table. Once, those words would have stung, turned my skin hot, my throat dry. This time, I looked him in the eye and said nothing. Silence can be louder than a retort when wielded correctly. I took my seat. Calm. Collected. Inside, the numbers I'd been studying for weeks pulsed like ammunition ready to fire. The meeting dragged through reports and projections, but every line was poisoned with Ethan's fingerprints. He'd steered contracts into his circle, shifted alliances until board members who once sat firmly under my wife's vision now angled their chairs toward him. I watched. Listened. Measured. Every hesitation. Every nervous glance. Every cleared throat before someone aligned with Ethan's recommendations. They thought they were hiding it, but to a man who'd lived in silence, their calls were deafening. Finally, Ethan leaned forward, tapping the table with his finger as though he owned it. The numbers don't lie, he said smoothly, eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second before landing on her. The company needs new direction. Stronger, bolder, more aggressive. And frankly, we can't be weighed down by personal entanglements. The insinuation was clear. This time, I answered. My voice was calm, clipped. Funny. I've been looking at numbers too. And if bold means stacking debt like kindling and calling it firewood, then yes, you're bold. A murmur traveled across the table. Ethan's smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. My wife turned her head toward me, really turned, not the frozen mask she wore for the room. In her eyes there was something I hadn't seen in years. Something raw. But before the shift could settle, Ethan moved again. He straightened, signaling the board secretary. I think it's time, he said. Confusion rippled through me, until folders were slid across the table. Votes. Paper and ink, simple but lethal. Ethan's grin widened, all teeth now. We'll let the board decide whether current leadership still serves the company's future. A secret vote. Binding. The floor fell out beneath me. My wife froze, caught off guard, her fingers tightening on the armrest. A vote. Tonight. The war had escalated in a single breath, and no one in the room looked surprised but us. The boardroom emptied like a battlefield after a skirmish, papers left behind like corpses, voices hushed, footsteps retreating into polished hallways. The vote wasn't finalized yet. Results would be tallied and released tomorrow. But the silence afterward told me enough. Ethan had allies. Too many. I sat there, fingers steepled, staring at the glass tabletop as if I could will it to crack under the weight of my fury. My wife stood frozen at the head of the table, still in her chair, still in her armor, but I could see the strain in her jaw, the white of her knuckles where she gripped the armrests. When the last board member finally left, she turned to me. For a heartbeat, she looked like the girl I used to know, the one who had fire in her eyes instead of marble. Walk with me, she said. We slipped into her private office, the door clicking shut behind us. The moment it did, her mask shattered. She paced, shoulders tight, words spilling like water breaking through a dam. He's been working on them for months, she said. Longer, maybe. Contracts, whispers, dinners behind closed doors. I knew he was maneuvering, but not like this. Her voice cracked on the last word. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So you knew. Her eyes flicked to me, stung. Not like this. I thought I could manage him. I thought keeping him close was safer than cutting him out. A bitter laugh escaped me. Keeping him close. Is that what I saw? The meetings. The dinners. The posts. Safe, was it? Her pacing stopped. She faced me squarely, eyes rimmed red but sharp as glass. Don't you dare reduce this to, she faltered, swallowing. You don't understand the kind of hold he has. I stared at her. The words she hadn't said hung heavier than the ones she had. The kind of hold he has. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice low. Because right now, all I see is a man gutting your company while you let him sit at your side like a king. She closed her eyes, pressing her palms against them as if to push back the flood. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, broken. When we started this company, he was the one who showed me how to play the board, how to pull strings, how to bend the rules. He was brilliant, ruthless. And she choked on the word. I admired him. I needed him. I told myself I'd moved on, that I'd outgrown him. But every time he looks at me, I feel the weight of those years. He knows me too well. The silence between us was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to rage at her for letting him in, for not seeing the trap. But the truth was worse than negligence. The truth was entanglement. I forced myself to ask it, even though I dreaded the answer. Were you complicit? Her lips trembled. No. Not complicated. Just, blind. Or maybe I didn't want to see. Because if I did, I'd have to admit what I've been avoiding. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there froze me. Shame, fear, and something else that cut deeper than either. And if I'm honest, her voice cracked into a whisper. Part of me still loves him. The words landed like a blade between my ribs, sharp and merciless. The night after her confession, I didn't sleep. Her words replayed in my head like a poison loop. Part of me still loves him. That should have broken me. Months ago, it would have. But instead, it forged something colder, sharper. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of our penthouse, the city lights spilling through the curtains like 1,000 unblinking eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt the chains slip from my wrists. If she still loved him, fine. If she was too blind to cut him off, fine. That wasn't my burden anymore. My role as the dutiful, quiet spouse, the buffer, the shield, was dead. I was going to fight. Not for her. Not even against him. But for me. By dawn, I was already at David's apartment, the CFO's place cluttered with printouts, half-drained coffee mugs, and glowing screens. He looked up as I entered, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights of number crunching. "You're serious about this," he said, no preamble. "Deadly," I replied. He slid a folder across the table. "Then here's your weapon." Inside, Ethan's financial skeletons. Debts leveraged against assets he didn't fully own. Loans tied up in shell companies in jurisdictions even regulators didn't bother to look at. A structure built to look invincible, until you knew which beam to kick. His empire's made of paper, David said. One strong wind, and it all burns. I smiled grimly. Then let's bring the storm. The next week, I moved in silence. No more shadowing my wife at events, no more smiling like a trophy at her side. I cancelled appearances. Declined invitations. When board members asked where I was, she'd have no answer, and that was exactly the point. Instead, I spent my nights in quiet rooms with David, building the kind of financial trap Ethan wouldn't see until the teeth were already locked shut. We bought up pieces of his debt through shell accounts, slowly, invisibly. Pressured his lenders, whispered to the right analysts. I funneled my own inheritance, money I'd once promised to pour into her empire, into an operation designed to bleed him dry. Every spreadsheet became a battlefield. Every hidden column, a sword. And for the first time, I wasn't the house husband sitting in the back. I was the architect of ruin. It didn't take long for the ripples to reach him. By Thursday, whispers circled, his creditors were restless. His liquidity thinned. By Friday, one of his pet projects stalled when a lender abruptly tightened the leash. Ethan was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He felt the pressure, and he started sniffing for the source. The strike came Monday afternoon. I wasn't there, but David told me afterward how it happened. My wife was mid-meeting, pitching a new expansion project to skeptical board members, when Ethan walked in. Not as a guest. Not as an ally. But as a wolf baring his teeth. He didn't even look at the board first. He went straight to her. I can picture it in my mind. The smug grin, the way he always leaned just close enough to invade personal space, to remind her of the past she couldn't quite shake. Then, in front of everyone, he said it. Your husband just signed your death warrant. Independence has a taste. For me, it was black coffee in a rented corner office, the hum of a printer in the background, and silence so sharp I could hear my own pulse. After years of being her husband, years of living in borrowed shadows, I finally had a space that was mine. And across the desk from me, sitting with a neat stack of papers and the kind of sharp, amused eyes that saw through every facade, was Anna. She wasn't from my wife's world. That was the point. A financial consultant, half Latina, half shark, she had no history with Ethan, no loyalty to my wife, no patience for the old games. She read through David's findings like sheet music, humming under her breath. "You've got him cornered," she said finally. "But you're still thinking small. Bleeding him out isn't enough. If you want him erased, you need a spectacle." I raised an eyebrow. "A spectacle?" She leaned forward, her voice almost playful. "Markets don't just punish weakness. They feed on it. You time the right leak, the right short, the right whisper, and the board won't just see him as a liability. They'll demand his head." Her words lit something inside me, a match in a room full of dry kindling. For years I had been careful, quiet, and deliberate. But maybe it was time to be ruthless. My wife didn't like it. She showed up 2 nights later at my office. Not the penthouse, not the places where she held the power. Here, in my domain, under fluorescent lights and the scent of printer ink. "You moved out," she said, eyes scanning the Spartan office, the lone lamp on my desk. "Just like that?" "Just like that," I said without looking up from my laptop. She exhaled sharply. "This isn't you. You're not like him. You don't do war." I closed the laptop. Met her eyes. "You don't know what I do. That's the problem, isn't it? You've never cared to know." She flinched, and for a moment, she looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like the woman I married. Vulnerable. Tired. "He's ruining me," she whispered. "I don't know who to trust. I don't even know if I can trust you anymore." I wanted to laugh. Now she was unsure. After years of silence, after letting him call me a house husband in front of her board, after admitting she still loved him. "You want me to save you," I said evenly. "But you never once thought about saving me." The board meeting came faster than expected. Ethan strode in, his usual arrogance painted across his face, while my wife trailed behind him, caught between fear and denial. The board members, restless and divided, whispered among themselves. They didn't know where to lean anymore, toward her history, toward his promises, or toward the silent storm they hadn't yet realized was me. Anna and David sat behind me, quiet but steady. My team. My proof that I wasn't a shadow anymore. Ethan opened his mouth first, smirking as he flaunted projections, bold claims, and empty charts. The board nodded, some impressed, some skeptical, but none brave enough to challenge him. My wife tried to interject, but he cut her off smoothly, his dominance unquestioned. And that's when I stood. The room hushed. I didn't need theatrics. I didn't need anger. I simply laid out the numbers, his debts, his falsified valuations, his impossible promises. Slide by slide, I showed the rot in his empire, the cracks no one else had dared to expose. Murmurs erupted. Faces turned from him to me, from him to my wife, from him to the truth they could no longer ignore. And then, I turned to her. Her eyes were wide, her breath shallow, as though she realized for the first time who I really was. "You made me invisible," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Now watch as I erase him." The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Ethan Hale declares bankruptcy. SEC investigation underway. His face was plastered across every business feed, not in the glossy way he loved, but in the grainy humiliation of paparazzi shots and courtroom sketches. The same mouth that once curled into smirks in boardrooms was frozen now in shock, anger, defeat. And just like that, the man who called me a house husband was reduced to a cautionary tale. I didn't celebrate. Not in the way people expected, anyway. There was no champagne, no toast, no victory lap. I sat alone in my office, watching the headlines scroll past, the way one might watch a storm pass over the sea. For years, Ethan had played at being the king. He thought life was a series of conquests, all swagger and brute force. He thought humiliating me made him stronger. But kings fall. Always. And me? I had stopped playing his game long ago. Checkmate doesn't come from brute force. It comes from patience, from silence, from letting the other man trap himself while you quietly move your pieces. My wife called that night. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. No power, no ice, just a frayed thread of someone clutching at what was left. "He's gone," she said. "The company. My company. It's bleeding. I don't know how to fix it." For a moment, I almost felt the old instinct, to comfort her, to pick up the pieces she had dropped, to shield her from the storm. But that man was gone. "You'll survive," I said simply. "I need you." Her voice cracked. "Not just the company. Me. Us." I closed my eyes. I remembered the boardroom dinner where she let him call me a house husband, the phone call where his voice lingered in the background, the confession, part of me still loves him. The truth was sharp now, unclouded. She hadn't needed me as a partner. She had needed me as a shield. And I was done being a shield. I can't be your invisible piece anymore, I told her. You played your game with him. I've started my own. The silence that followed was heavier than anything we'd ever shared. Anna leaned against the doorway of my office later that week, arms crossed, watching me work. You don't even look relieved, she teased. Most people would be out buying a sports car right now. I smirked. A car depreciates the second you drive it off the lot. I'd rather build something that lasts. Her grin widened, spoken like a man with a vision. Maybe she was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving on borrowed power or someone else's empire. I was building. My own consultancy was growing, David had joined me full-time, and Anna had turned from an ally into something sharper, something like a partner. Not in the way my wife had been, all image and ice. But in a way that mattered. I thought back to the beginning. To the sting of that word, house husband. To the laughter around the table. To the humiliation of being dismissed, diminished, forgotten. And then I looked at the pieces on the board now. Ethan, toppled. My wife, diminished, fading into the background of her own empire. Me, no longer playing catch-up, but dictating the game. They had thought I was a pawn. They forgot pawns, given enough time, can become queens. So this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. It was the opening. My opening. The first move of a game that was finally mine. I wasn't the CEO's husband anymore. I was the man who erased her rival, and the strategist who would build an empire of his own.